I got involved in 1962, and what that meant, so like if I'd give a talk in a church, which I sometimes did, it would mean 4 people, you know, the minister, the organizer, a drunk who walked in off the street, and a guy who wanted to kill me. That was a talk in a church. And that went on for a couple of years. The only really risky step.
Are you suggesting the anti-war movement during Vienna was mainly alcoholic?
Right. Don't tell David Brooks. In 1965, I tried to organize, an artist friend of mine, since died, tried to organize national tax resistance. Well, we got somewhere, so that's taking, you know, sort of a mild risk. But in 1966, there were the stirrings of an effort to organize more serious resistance.
Did you not pay your taxes?
I didn't pay my taxes for years. But you know, it's, I mean, there is how the IRS reacted is kind of interesting. In my case, of course, they could get the money. You know.
And did they just take it out of your salary?
Took it. I got a nasty letter from them from some computer. But in some cases, they randomly, as far as I could tell, they took people's houses, people went to jail, and so on. So there's a kind of a risk associated with it. But more serious was support of direct resistance, support for resistors, deserters, and so on and so forth. That began around 1966. It became public in 1967. And that did carry potential penalties. I mean, actually, my wife, we had 3 kids. She went back to college after 17 years because we expected I'd probably end up in jail. You know. And it came pretty close. I mean, a trial was announced in '68, which I was the main defendant. I was saved, as were others, by the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive came along in January 1968, and it convinced the business world in the United States that the U.S. that this was just becoming too costly.
What were you charged with?
The charges were conspiracy to, you know, resist the draft or overthrow the government or something or other. The conspiracy trials are kind of an interesting story. I could talk about them, but it was real. You know, if it hadn't been for the Tet Offensive, I probably would have spent a couple of years in jail. But
did you go through the trial?
The trials were called off right after the Tet Offensive. There was one that was underway, but you know, the Spock trial, where they picked all the wrong people, and that it was overturned on appeal, but mainly because of the Tet Offensive. I mean, the business world just said, look, out. In fact, what happened in 1968 is that a group of so-called wise men, you know, big shots from Wall Street and so on, went down to Washington and basically gave the president marching orders. It was a very real power play. Johnson was told, stop the bombing of North Vietnam, don't run for office again, and begin negotiations and start to withdraw. And he followed orders to the letter. Then Nixon came along and did it a different way. But the visible escalation of the war declined. Visible, I say, because some of the worst atrocities were in 1969, and then it went off to Cambodia and Laos, where it was even worse, but that was kind of invisible, still is. But it kind of tempered at that point, and one of the things that was done was to call off the trials, because there was an effort on the part of the government to sort of make peace, you know, make peace with the students, and that was an interesting story, too. But that ended the trials. But, yeah, that was... yeah, it was risky. Civil disobedience it's no fun, you know. I mean, you can't really say it's risky, so maybe you get maced or beaten or something like that. Spend a couple of days in jail, but not the pleasantest experience. But it's not the kind of risk that dissidents take in other countries, you know. But, yeah, that's the kind of decisions you have to make. You just can't become involved part-time in these things. It's either serious and you're seriously involved, or you know, you go to a demonstration and go home and forget about it and go back to work. You know? Nothing happens. You know? I mean, things only happen by really dedicated, diligent work. I mean, we're not allowed to say nice things about the Communist Party, right? That's like a rule. But one of the reasons why the New Deal legislation worked, you know, which was significant, you know, just changed the country, was because there were people who were there every day, whether it was a civil rights issue, a labor rights issue, organizing, anything else. They were there, ready to turn the mimeograph machines, no internet, organized demonstrations. They had a memory, you know, the movement had a memory, which it doesn't have now. Now everyone starts over from fresh. But it had a kind of a tradition, a memory that people were always there. If you look back, it was very heavily Communist Party activists. Well, you know, that was destroyed. And that's one of the lack of such a sector of dedicated, committed people who understand that you're not going to win tomorrow. You know, you're going to have a lot of defeats, and there'll be a lot of trouble, you know, and a lot of things will happen to you that aren't nice. But if you keep at it, you can get somewhere. And that's why we have had a civil rights movement and labor movement and so on. The lesson that we ought to learn, there was a split in American public opinion, very sharp split. It was very visible in the early 70s between elite opinion, you know, newspapers, Harvard faculty, and so on the one hand, and the general population on the other. Not the anti-war movement, the general population. In elite opinion, articulate opinion, and that you can read, so it's easy to document, the most extreme condemnation of the war was that it was a mistake which proved to be too costly. Okay, that's about as far as you can go. Among the public, about 70% in polls said it's not a mistake, it's fundamentally wrong and immoral. Okay? It's a very sharp and significant split, and I think the lesson we'll learn is, to bring it to today, that say when Obama is praised for opposing the war in Iraq because he thought it was a mistake, we should recognize that to be on a par with you know, Nazi generals after Stalingrad, who thought that the two-front war was a mistake. The issue isn't whether it's a mistake, it's whether it's fundamentally wrong and immoral. Well, that's the lesson that has to be drawn. That's what the public probably already understands, but we have to do something with and organize with.
I'll just say one thing. There's this quote that I've been trying to find out who said it. I think back on my life over all the times I thought I went too far, and I realize now I didn't go far enough. I don't think Noam Chomsky said that. World-renowned linguist and dissident Noam Chomsky speaking at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts at an event sponsored by the Harvard Extension International Relations Club. About 800 people packed Memorial Church. If you'd like a copy of today's program, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. Special thanks to Ray Boyer. Democracy Now! Is hiring an online outreach and communications manager. We're looking for an experienced online strategist to help us reach the widest possible online audience. Visit democracynow.org for more information. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Shrew Hadokadu, Sarah Mate, Anjali Kamat, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Masood, Robbie Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Peter Curries, Miguel Noguera, our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Nick Gilla, Hugh Grant, Samantha Chambly, Jessel Noor, Vesta Godars, Julie Crosby, Karen Ranucci. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.